Hello, my name is Winnie Faye Tuban. This is my speech to inform assignment, and now I'm going to have my audience introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Damien Gonzalez.
Hi, I'm Jano Singson.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Arvala.
Hey, I'm Ezra Bagaleos.
Hi, I'm Kyle Chantalak.
Hi, I'm Xavier Salvador.
Hey, I'm Jacob Pollock.
Pandas. We all know them. With their big fluffy bodies and their adorable black little ears and eyes, the panda is easily one of the most recognizable animals in the world. Many differences come up about with captive and wild pandas when discussing these cute little creatures. Filled with curiosity about this subject, I went ahead and found out the differences between these two groups of giant Chinese pandas. Today, I'm going to inform my audience about the similarities and differences between pandas who live in captivity compared to pandas who live in the wild. In order to show the different ways in which these two groups are distinct from one another, I have grouped my points. First, I will explain the similarities and differences in their diets and eating habits. Next, I will explain the differences with breeding between the two groups of pandas. And finally, I'll explain the behavioral differences between captive and wild pandas. So, first of all, what is so different between these two? The first thing comes first, eating. Captive and wild pandas have vastly different eating habits. The odd eating behaviors between the captive pandas and wild pandas can affect pandas who were born and raised in the wild. In an animal conservation article written for the Institute of Conservation Research, Dr. Ronald R. Swaisgood writes about the odd habits captive pandas have when eating food, stating that any deviation in foraging behavior that is observed in wild-born counterparts living under the same circumstance is potential cause for concern. Because captive-born pandas have different foraging habits than wild pandas, it can affect the wild population when captive-born pandas rejoin them. Additionally, captive and wild pandas also have different gut bacteria. So this means that they are different not only in appetite, but they are also different in their biological composition of digesting their food. According to a 2019 article named Comparative Study of Gut Microbiota in Wild and Captive Pandas from the National Center for Biotechnical Information, captive pandas' gut bacteria is altered because of other foods that are introduced into their diet that they otherwise would not have eaten in the wild. As we know, pandas love eating bamboo. And as you can see from this picture of a very fat panda that is in its enclosure, they already get extremely big in the wild, but they also digest their food differently because within captivity they are introduced to foods like apples and meats because pandas are naturally carnivorous. So, what else is different about pandas? We also know that pandas have vastly different breeding patterns when kept in captivity compared to in the wild. According to a research article in the 2004 book Zoo Biology, Dr. Ronald R. Swaisgood states that in about 1/3 of mating failures, the male lacked sexual motivation and showed excessive aggression 20% of the time. Wild pandas they already have a difficult time breeding in the wild. So when they're in captivity, males often show excessive aggression, and it leads to even smaller chance of copulation when they are procreating. I'll discuss this point later on when I get to how wild pandas procreate. Both, adding on to what I mentioned earlier, both captive and wild pandas have a small window of fertility. So, as I mentioned just now, both captive and wild pandas already have a hard time procreating. However, in the wild, they already have a small window of fertility, and this is because pandas are naturally solitary creatures. They really only have a small window of time to be able to copulate, and once the young is born, young panda cubs are extremely hard to take care of. According to a BBC Earth article named The Truth About Giant Pandas, the author, Henry Nichols, writes, giant pandas have a peculiar reproductive cycle, with adult females becoming fertile just once for less than 2 days. So what this means is that male pandas only have a short window of time before they can produce more young. Now let's move on to the behavioral differences between these two different pandas. Wild pandas tend to be lazier. In an article from PBS, they interviewed filmmaker Jackie Poon about his experiences with pandas while filming the documentary Pandas, Born to be Wild. When asked about the differences between wild and captive baby pandas, Poon described baby pandas in the wild as didn't really doing much other than sleeping, compared to captive pandas, who he described as having a lot more fun. Wild pandas are lazier because they really only eat one kind of food, which is bamboo. And as I mentioned earlier, captive pandas get to eat a multitude of different kinds of foods because of other foods that are introduced into their diet. Additionally, pandas are naturally solitary animals. I mentioned this earlier when discussing their breeding patterns, but in an article from National Geographic titled The Giant Panda, they state that giant pandas are solitary and that they have a highly developed sense of smell that males use to avoid each other. And though wild pandas often laze around in the mountainous bambooed forests of China in solitary, captive pandas, more specifically baby pandas, often have playmates and toys such as tires because many baby pandas get rescued from the wild from poaching. In conclusion, though we see pandas as these cute and cuddly creatures, it's important to recognize the differences that have been brought upon pandas because of their status as a vulnerable species previously endangered. Captivity has brought upon traits to pandas that wouldn't have otherwise developed naturally. They are vastly different down to their behavior, breeding patterns, and even the way they interact and behave. Cute and cuddly in both circumstances, it's important to see the things that captivity and endangerment has brought to these adored bears.